On startups, may I request Sean Randolph, Senior Director, Bay Area Council Economic Institute, Jeet Vijay, CEO of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology Startup Hub, Government of India, and Deepak Bagla, Managing Director and CEO, Invest India, as well as Lavanya Ashok, Partner Trifecta Capital, to moderate the session.
I can see, given the theme of the Global Technology Summit. Our great pleasure to welcome all of you to this panel. Really excited for this conversation with some really diverse perspectives coming in, both from India and across the world. I think a lot has been said today about India's rise as a digital superpower. I think as someone in venture capital, the fact that we have 80,000 startups and counting, the fact that India is the third largest venture market in the world. In 2021, 38.5 billion flowed into the country, which was unprecedented. Unicorns are being minted at a dizzying pace, current slowdown notwithstanding. Gives me great pleasure to bring together this group of thinkers. And some of the themes we'd like to focus on today for this panel include how do we take the enablers for the ecosystems we are familiar with and lift and shift that to make this seamless in what can become a borderless world. So maybe, Sean, I can start with you. The Silicon Valley is a famed area for innovation. There's many theories about what makes it so special. Is it Stanford? Is it venture capital and Sand Hill Road? Is it, the early days of counterculture where there was unbridled capitalism coupled with irreverence and the ability to distort reality to make magic happen? So would love to start with you. And if you can tell us a little bit about your learnings from the Valley.
Of course. So thanks very much first to Carnegie and to the Ministry of External Affairs for the opportunity to be here. I'm from San Francisco. I run a business-supported think tank on the economy of San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So we think a lot about innovation systems and how they work, and we're visited by many friends from around the world who want to have those conversations about how does their system relate to ours, are there learnings to take away from it, are there things we can learn from them. And globally, what we've seen, especially I think in the last 5 years, a really robust development of innovation ecosystems around the world. They all have certain things in common, the most successful ones, the most dynamic ones. And Silicon Valley is absolutely not the only one, but it's had the longest history, the longest existence, and is perhaps the premier model. So what has happened to make that successful? So there's certain key elements. So one is research universities. So if you look around the world, it's pretty rare to find a successful innovation system without a significant research university. It's generating technology, but the universities, if we think about Stanford and Berkeley and universities like that, they're also generating founders. So we found that of founders in the Bay Area, and this is true around California as well, most of those who came out of universities started their companies close to the campus they came from. So why do you have these great clusters of startups around Stanford, around Berkeley, around other universities? Because that's the connections that are taking technology off campus. So you've got the research universities. Very often there are national government research laboratories. We're lucky in our region to have, I think, 16 or 18% of all the federal research labs in the US. So there's a national component of that. Then you have independent nonprofit research laboratories. So these are all generating technology. And then you have the corporate research labs, some of which may be focusing on basic theoretical research, but much more so these days on applied research. So the technology is coming out, the innovators are coming out, the entrepreneurs, and then if you can find right outside the door the venture capital. And so the industry was largely created in the Bay Area, and roughly between 35 and 40% of all the venture investment in the US happens within a very tiny region, which is in the Bay Area. So having access to the venture capital, which may be angel investment, it may be early stage, late stage, whatever stage, is really critically important. Then there's the accelerator system. And there's so many different kinds of accelerators. They can be freestanding, independent ones like 500 startups, or it could be plug and play, or others, or they could be university affiliated, they could be affiliated with overseas governments, they could be sector specific, but a huge variety of those. And I think the key is, we found that it's not just the institutions or the building, it's the frame of mind. You could build a tech campus and be not very innovative at all. It really is about a spirit and attitude of open innovation, where entrepreneurship is respected and where it's supported, where people, and these are both founders and investors, are prepared to take risk, because the bigger the risk, probably the bigger the reward. And the idea of tearing down or reducing barriers to collaboration between universities and industry and government. So one of the takeaways that I always think of when people ask what makes Silicon Valley successful, it's the ability to minimize barriers to collaboration. It's open innovation where you reduce the friction between industry and universities, between industry and government, and get them all as far as possible on the same sheet of paper to enable open innovation.
That's wonderful. And Mr. Pai, you just gave a fantastic presentation on many things, including digital public goods. But maybe a little bit from your perspective on what about that model can easily be shifted to multiple countries that are on their own digital journey, and what they can seek to us for inspiration.
Lavanya, first of all, we can't duplicate what US has done in Silicon Valley. Forget about it. We can't do it. It's very unique, happens once in a lifetime, and it's happened there, it'll remain there, because they control the world. It's a 23 trillion economy. There is business there, there is money there, risk appetite there, wonderful people, the best brains in the world go there. So, we have to see what to do differently. In most emerging markets, if you want to have digital innovation, you got to create public platforms. Why public platforms? Because they create the data and the usage for consumers at a low cost, on top of which you can build innovation. So digital public platforms have to come up, like the India model, which has really worked. Imagine without the India stack, could we do many things that we have done today? And that is essential. Second thing is, we need capital. So now, all this World Bank and others, instead of giving loans to countries, should create fund of funds for every country which want digital innovation. A fund of funds which will invest along with local funds in innovation. So if there's a fund of $1 billion for a country that can invest in 30, 40 funds, 25, 30% raise the balance money, that can fund 1,000, 2,000 entrepreneurs, because you need capital. You need risk capital. You don't need long-term loans. There is huge amount of risk capital in the US. In India, out of this $112 billion, only 10% is Indian capital. The US has put the money into India, not the Indians. Indians like to buy steel companies and all kind of land and gold and all night. $50 billion of gold is bought in this country every year, okay? That is number second. And the third, what is required is, we have to create a consortium of the top 10 universities in every country and put them into a network of R&D, where they create the human capital at the master's and PhD levels. Even India has a problem. Because, can we duplicate US? No, because we are not putting enough money into R&D. The total amount of R&D spent in all our Indian universities is $800 million a year, which is a joke. With a rounding off error for one university in the US. Only 800 million. And we got 35 million young people in college, 1,000 universities. This is peanuts. right? Because unless you create the innovation in universities where young people grow, graduate, they dream, they come out with innovation and create capital for them, you're not going to create that kind of thing for innovation that's required. So these are the three things that are required for the G20 countries to come up to some level so they can use the digital assets the world has and the innovation to improve the lives of people. I think these are the building blocks that, and US has done it very well over 50 years. For example, in India, defense R&D is the DRDO is a closed system. Space is opening up, but it was with space, closed system. We have created a closed system. After independence, we created the CSIR, a closed system. Nobody knows what they do. We spend nearly $1 billion there, but they don't know. The fruits of their R&D, is it going to universities? We have to excite young people, young graduates. That is the trick the US has done. It's the young people who come out, become innovators, become founders, become billionaires, and then every young person wants to be a billionaire, right, Deepak? Deepak was a banker. He knows all this stuff. So I think these are the things we have to do, Lavanya.
No, absolutely. I think makes a lot of sense, and a good segue to Jeet, who is the CEO of the Startup Hub. So Jeet, would be lovely to hear from your perspective what the ministry is doing and some of the initiatives you're spearheading to excite the youth, to make the conditions such that they can get the capital they need, they can continue to build these big dreams that we all have.
Thank you for that question. And first of all, thank you to Carnegie for this program. And I think with the G20 presidency coming to India, it's a right time for us to rethink, do we want to follow the world development model that has been there since the Industrial Revolution that we've been talking about over the last 100, 200 years? Or do we want to shape the trajectory of growth and make it more clear and sustainable? Because as government, we don't think 1 year or 5 year. We have to think of the humanity. And as our Honorable Prime Minister says, it's about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one world, one people. Now, having said that, now let's think about it a little bit. Adam Smith, or if you look at the economists back in the day, it's about the competitive advantage of the firm or the comparative advantage of nations. Each nation is endowed with its own capabilities and competencies and advantages. We cannot follow US or China if we want to lead the world in a different way. We have to identify our own advantages. And as Mohandas was mentioning, what India has done and what our Honorable Prime Minister realized very quickly once he came to power is India will be built on the intellect of its people, and technology is a great equalizer. What we used to call in the traditional days that education is a great equalizer. He believed in the power of technology with the whole Digital India mission, Startup India mission back in the day, 6-7 years ago now, which laid the foundation for where we are today. We have open source interoperable systems that we have created. India is creating that digital economy. India is creating an economy in the cloud fueled by the data. And be it Gati Shakti, be it the logistics mission, ONDC, or anything else, it's allowing everyone to participate in the potential to create something. And now Ministry of Electronics and IT, guided by our Minister, Honorable Shri Ashwini Vaishnav, and our Minister of State, Rajiv Chandrasekharji, is focused on identifying how do we leverage private sector more to create. Because government in itself, the best it can do is what our Prime Minister says, maximum governance, minimum government. Enable the engagement of private sector, let leaders who are thinkers take the stage, let them guide where we need to go. Have them engage both as stakeholder in the early part of consultation, but also in the implementation. So today at Ministry of Electronics and IT, we are supporting more than 100 incubators, center of excellence, and accelerators across India. We have international programs because we believe that sharing and co-creation is critical. So we have programs with UK, France, Germany, and we are looking at some Middle Eastern countries where we are looking at how do Indian startups go there and startups from there come here. And third thing that we have funding schemes all the way from idea validation, prototype creation, commercialization, and hypergrowth. So we have a fund called EDF, Electronic Development Fund, which invests in VC fund, which invests in electronic and hardware startup. Because those startups don't get a lot of love from the investors because of long gestation, complexity of product development, etc. So funding is there, infrastructure is there, international collaborations are there. These are the three critical drivers. And fourth is private sector participation in all of these. Because unless we believe in the power that we are creating, we won't be able to take it to the level where we need to take it, be it in the climate tech space, where India is taking a leadership role now, because we have to think of the future, not only consumption today, but where the world will be in the next 50 years. Thank you.
No, some really great points there. And Deepak, why don't I come to you now? From Invest India's perspective, what are some of the ways you can further our objectives as we take on this G20 presidency, as this Startup 20 mission becomes more and more center stage? Would love to hear from you what's happening at Invest India.
Thank you, Lavanya. Quickly, Invest India. So the first is investment promotion and facilitation. We are the official single point of contact for any investor coming into India. The second vertical we have is Startup India. We are responsible for everything on the creation of the ecosystem. The third is very interesting, the Prime Minister's Science and Technology Initiative. And we had Mohan also allude to it. All innovation happening outside to try and see where it can fit into the government, and from the government outside, including DRDO, how we can take it to capitalization. And the last part is obviously digitization of the entire investor journey, the national single window, etc. Coming specifically to G20, in fact, we are having our 4th consultation meeting this evening with the G20 countries, the 4th one, and we had a dinner with the ambassadors last evening. What we are doing, so one is the startup vertical, which is a working group, which is being managed through Invest India. The other one, what we are doing is that the investment promotion agencies of all these countries, these are the actual execution arms of all policy, are getting together, and we've created an IPA 20. So this is a consultative group, which next year Brazil, when it heads, will be becoming a working group. In the 4 consultations, what has come out so far as the 3 deliverables which are coming out. So first, the sectors, digitization, sustainability, skill and development, and obviously climate and everything else with it. Everybody looking to us to create those public platforms which Mohan alluded to. They are the key to success. You created your India stack, that's what is happening. So what has happened? On the outcomes, what is emerging, 3 of them, if I'll just leave that as a thought with you. The first is a global solutions platform from G20. Any startup or innovator will position their solution which they have on that platform. And anybody looking for a solution can come onto that and access it. So that's one. That is to get innovation and startups together. The second one is on supply chain movement. On that supply chain movement, and it impacts the startup community in all these aspects. The biggest hindrance which we hear from all the member countries is about sharing of information on supply chain movement. And that's now the biggest thing happening globally. So again, we are looking at a digital platform where all countries will be sharing relevant information on it. It'll be a public platform for any company across the globe to access it and see where they want to position it. And the third challenge which is coming is how do we create very practical, executable financial structures to steer sustainable investments towards them. So that means creating, let's say, a digital platform where you'll have a bouquet of all sustainable projects which an investor can look at. To somebody being able to rate them as sustainable. To somebody creating the right financial structures, and then to help capacity building for each of these countries to be able to create that skill to execute them. Now, these are the 3 which are emerging now. We still have 5 more meetings to go. We will be finalizing our recommendations by July 1st week. But what I must bring about to one point. When we started Startup India on 16 January 2016, in the morning, one of the very senior functionaries told me, I asked them, how will you evaluate my team's success? Which we'd started. And they said the day a mother in India is happy to give their daughter to a startup. And from that day it was that how do we change the mindset of success and failure? The second thing which we did, and I think which helped well, is when we created Startup India Hub. It's now the world's largest startup hub. We could help create the dots. Sean was referring to that. The way you create an ecosystem is how fast you can create the dots and create the ability to free each one to be able to create those dots. And I think that is what is happening in India. What Jeet is doing, Mohan in any case is leading that, is all referring to Sean. And about taking the US role, I think one of my favorite singers is Elton John. And I seriously believe in that circle of life. It is a circle, Sean. And everybody has their own journey in it. But if you go back to what happened 250 years ago, we had our moment. I think that moment of inflection is now coming back via that circle. And what is happening in that, for the first time in our history, digitization is converting population into human resource. I remember when I went to school and learned economics, everybody told us the biggest challenge we had was our population. And I think today everybody's saying the biggest strength of India is its population. Look at ourselves, 9,200 days from today, we'll be 15th August 2047. Sean, that's when we turn 100 years. We are much below you in numbers, as you know, in age. And on that day, 21% of the world's middle class and 20% of the world's workforce will be here. That exactly shows you the pathway which you are leading to.
No, I think absolutely. If you look at recent research that's been done on the trajectory we're on, people are predicting we will more than double our economy in this decade. We will cross 7 trillion. Mohan alluded to 10 shortly thereafter because of the power of compounding. And if we look at the importance in this journey of obviously forging our own path, there's no easy lift and shift. But Sean, if you think about the value of connecting these localized ecosystems that have had their own trajectory, but that may have linkages that could be very valuable, both for innovation and then for the flow of capital, which is, as Mr. Pai alluded to, a very important ingredient in this entire cake we're baking. What are some of the thoughts that you have?
It's a very good question. I think we in Silicon Valley have really benefited from a very open global platform. And actually, India produces more company founders in Silicon Valley than any other country by far. And so that's been a huge enabler of growth for us. So that global connectivity is absolutely critical. And we have hundreds of startups and technologists from Europe and Mexico and essentially everywhere. So we've seen in the last, I'd say, 5, 6, 7 years, this explosion of entrepreneurship around the world. The rapid development, in particular during COVID, but even before that, of innovation ecosystems in many different parts of the world, places where they were very nascent before, now they're really flourishing, Mexico, Argentina, other G20 members. So I think, as you said, Mohandas, you can't easily replicate Silicon Valley. It's there, it's what it is. And every system has its own unique characteristics, and each one actually has its strength and its weakness and is at a different point in its development. So thinking about the G20, what strikes me is there's an opportunity to do at least 2 things, and probably more than that. One is to connect them around like shared experience and best practices. There are these key elements in the model, but even within one key element, they're so different. So how does a university design entrepreneurial training and education programs? It may have an accelerator. Is it a university accelerated? Some are operated jointly with the private sector. Some are on and off campus. Some are completely privately funded but have an affiliation with the university. Does the university operate a venture capital fund of its own? If so, does the funding come from public sources or from private sources, maybe alumni donors or things like that? You have the same question of a huge variety of different kinds of accelerators, both large and small and incubators. Like what have the most effective models been? And then you have sort of different focal points by sectors where some areas are building on strengths. So some may have great medical schools, they're doing medical technology. Others may have great computer science programs, they're doing AI. Others, agriculture is a key industry, they're doing ag tech and things like that. So I think at one level, there's just a lot of learning that can be done by shared experience between leaders in different innovation ecosystems about what is working best and what is not working. I think the big thing, though, is connecting the entrepreneurs in these countries to markets. Many of them are starting off in their own market. They may be going into regional markets. Let's say you're in Mexico, you're going to expand into Latin America and vice versa. The U.S. is always a big target market. But the key thing as they grow is to find partners so they can connect to other entrepreneurs in other countries around shared objectives. There's some really innovative models worth looking at that Israel has come up with about how to expose their entrepreneurs globally to partners and investors and markets. But if we think about what are key sectors where we want to help our entrepreneurs grow, then using the G20 somehow to create mechanisms that introduce them to global markets, to global investors, and in particular also to global companies that can use their technology. Because very often the companies, we find that they're looking for those startups. They can invest in them, they can acquire them, or they can be the market for those technologies. And I think one huge step that G20 could look at is how do you set up mechanisms that enable those entrepreneurs to connect into a variety of global markets around key priorities.
I think some really good thoughts there on how we can facilitate more idea exchange in a more organized manner. Mr. Pai, I wanted to come back to your fund of funds point because I think it's a really important one. As we think about being a growth stage investor in this country at Trifecta, one of the things we've been seeing is the changing nature of the LP. We've seen a lot of Indian money start to come into the fold. I haven't seen that in my experience in the last decade. Part of it was there was a lot of value creation in 2021. There was liquidity, tech was hot. So a new type of LP came in. We saw the rise of family offices. And I think part of the pride for a fund manager to take some of that money in is to say we want to have value creation for people in India as well, right? We're happy to enrich endowments and pension funds from around the world by enabling them to invest in our companies, but equally, we would like to see value creation for local LPs. Just wanted to talk a little bit more about what the fund of funds model would entail. What are some of the capital providers that you could see in terms of large enduring institutions, which can really provide stability to that capital base?
Lavanya, every country should create the ecosystem for investment of risk capital. It cannot be done by government. In 2015, if I'm right, Deepak, we went to government and told them we wanted 10,000 crore, $1.5 billion fund of funds for India. Government was receptive. We wrote a paper from iSpirit. Then we met them. Jain Sinha was there. Then he said, who is going to run it? We said, SIDBI. SIDBI is the Small Industry Development Bank. He said, they have no expertise. You said, forget it. We will sit on the investment committee and we will tell them what to do. And we drew up norms. So we were the advisory committee. We sat on it. The proposal came there. And we had a simple algorithm. In the first year, we allocated to 60 funds. Today, India has got 1,200 AIFs. We created the fund industry. Government gave the money. Like that, can we have a $5 billion G20 fund for fund of funds in countries outside the United States, outside the EU? Because the EU has got a lot of money. They printed a lot of it in the COVID era, and the US has got $8 trillion printed. They got to observe that. Some of it can come here. And $5 billion is honestly peanuts to buy world peace. We're buying world peace. We're making the world a digital place. We're having inclusion for the last person around the world. We are improving the quality of life. We are getting in climate change. We want to make the world a better place. Please put some money. And once you have that fund, you get people like Deepak or you to manage that. And every country in the fund allocate some 500 million to one country and tell them that, look, your people start funds, will give you 20-25% and some expertise and training. Will Pool of Unitas Capital is doing that in his own way. Except he went to a very big, billionaire, and the billionaire salary didn't give money, even though he's selling billions on other things. But this is important because how do you create the institutional framework? For innovation, you require funds, risk capital. You require fund managers. They have to go search out. Young people like him have to go and say, I'm going to invest. I'm going to make a lot of money. That greed has to be there because it's a 10-year job. You know that, right? First 2 years is glamour, doling out money. Then next 6 years, you've got to wait for them to do something. So you get the money back and hopefully make some money, right? Unless you start a new fund. So we got to create this kind of network. India was successful to do that. In G20, we got to do that. So you got to go to all the big people there and tell them, give a few $1 billion. World Bank can give $1 billion. IFC can put in money. And, the European Development Bank. Because what we need in the world is hope for young people. We need innovation to solve the hard problems. We don't want people living in deprivation. We want financial inclusion for everybody. We want low-cost stuff so that, every country has a particular culture. And we have to make it happen. And today the means are there to make it happen. Because the cost of data has come down, cloud cost has come down, mobile cost has come down, and everybody can afford it. Imagine 8 billion people creating things. Maybe one declaration can be, Deepak, G20 should declare the objective is a digital world. Digital India, digital world. Startup India, startup world. Focus on them. Because we've got to focus on these young people. I think this is the way to do it. You need money. You need money.
And Deepak, any thoughts on capital formation from the seat in which you sit? Because in many cases, you're the first port of call.
So I'll tell you what I like, what has happened on the VC system here. So my previous life, I used to run a fund. So that's where coming from that side. I remember when we went to the LPs at that time, and look at the profile of the people managing fund in the early 2000s. They typically had to be educated overseas so that the LPs had comfort in them. Quite frankly, many of us had very little idea about India. And we came in and started putting money in here. The new set of fund managers which are coming out, and when we were talking of the VC thing at SIDBI, when we used to be evaluating the proposals coming in, I always used to ask two questions. One is, where will your deal flow come from? And how are you getting it from those small towns? And the other one is their profile. And what I liked, today a majority of them are local from small towns and cities, and they do not have to showcase a foreign degree to get an LP comfort, because the LP is rural. And that's a big number. To my mind, that is the first big change which is happening in India, and their ability to understand the deals they need to fund. And you will see better successes with that. The second, the real success will be when the corner sweet shop guy puts in his money as your seed capital in a small town in T3. And he shows off at a marriage function that my nephew is putting up a startup. It has started. And the moment that starts, you will see a flow of capital which is already beginning to come in. And what typically helps us is the good stories which get created. When the Mohan goes out, for example, he's an icon. There's an aspiration which gets created. When you have 107 of these unicorns and they go out and speak, you're seeing where the world is moving up to. And when you have an Indian mother willing to give the daughter to somebody who's doing a startup, I think we are quite out there. We need to pat ourselves on the back on this one. And since you asked me about FDI, if you give me a minute, should I give you a few numbers? Because that's what my primary job is. We closed this year with $83.5 billion, the highest ever we've got in our history. And remember, that too in a lockdown. Now let me tell you more. It came from 101 countries.
Wow.
It's a global record. And these 101 countries, it's not just about the money. It's about their trust in you. It's about their trust in your leadership. It's about their trust in the promise which you keep. And it's about the trust in your future. More interesting, it came across 57 sectors. No other country in the world has that bouquet of opportunities open. And Mohan, you like this one, which is the most heartening. It came across 31 states and union territories.
Brilliant.
The engine of growth of New India is now bottom up. It's no longer just Bangalore, Mohan. My apologies. It's moved much beyond the metros. And it's now those small towns and cities. And on startup itself, of those 88,000, we have 775 plus districts. Today, I have a registered startup in 689 of them. And it's increasing. The new India has just begun.
No, that's brilliant. And two takeaways for me. One, this son-in-law test, which I think, Deepak, you should patent. And two, I think I'll remove my Stanford degree from LinkedIn and, just keep my Indian degrees for now. Jeet, segue to you. You're doing a lot in tier 2, 3 and beyond. Can you talk to us a little bit about what MeitY's vision is for, inclusive, broad-based startup activity?
All right. See, the whole purpose is, as we're talking about, inclusive, affordable, accessible, and sustainable development. Development comes when everyone takes part in it. And now to Sean's earlier point, so before I was in the government, so I was the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Investments at University of Texas System. And I was running a fund for the university because we figured out the best model was take Stanford's model, create your own fund, and out of the endowment, they said take a couple of $100 million. Let's invest in IP-based startups that are coming from R&D-based funding. So we can create ROI on the R&D that's being spent. And so we pitched that to the regents at our university system. They liked it. But then we went to our alumni. And alumni were more crazy about it. They said, we will put the money in. Because the university didn't mind giving a couple of $100 million. It's $3 billion in R&D that University of Texas spends every year. So it was a very minuscule amount for them. But alumni were happy. And this is where the power of capitalism comes in that Mohan was also talking about. First, it's not the King Ferdinand or Queen Isabella that funded the Columbus voyage. The first joint stock company was the Dutch company, which allowed common man and women to take risk and participate in the commercial, activity, risk and reward wise. And they funded the voyages. The joint stock company funded the voyages, and that's how it went. They put up the missionaries on the ship. They went. They got spices and stuff, sold it back in Europe, made a lot of money. That was the whole start of capitalism, the way it was done. And even in India, I think we need to move more towards that, where even a small businessman or anyone can at least participate in that risk-taking. So we need to change some rules and frameworks, because government ultimately is operating in a resource-constrained environment. We have limited, either you can spend on health, you can spend on education, you can spend on infra, you can spend on meeting the needs of the poor and the middle class, tax, etc. But so having said that, now what ministry is doing to take this initiative to the tier 2 is a couple of things. One, we realize is that giving grant-based funding is a no-go at the end of the day. You have to get more risk appetite and more skin in the game from the common, even the startups and the other investors. So one of the schemes we launched, Samrid scheme, is actually saying we'll give you matching funding if you are able to raise matching funding from the investors. So we are the first risk money, but it's increasing the amount of money that's going into a startup. And on the same terms as a lead investor, except some governance rights that the government requires. Second thing, on the tier 2, we are looking at coming up with this 450 crore scheme, funding program that was announced by our Honorable Prime Minister a few months ago at Digital India Week. And in that also, it's primarily focused on funding pilot projects, because a lot of startups that can make 5-10 units of their PCBs, etc., and they want to deploy it somewhere, but they don't have 100 units that they can deploy for a pilot program. So we are funding the pilot program through that scheme. And also we are doing a little bit of a seed funding, where we are asking matching funding has to come in. And so that's the kind of narrative we are taking, and it's primarily focused on tier 2, tier 3, because Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Delhi NCR have capital markets which need not be distorted by government coming into them. We need a funding access availability to the people who have, or the startups that don't have access to these markets. So that's something that we are working on. And last point I'll touch quickly on is, we are under G20, we are doing digital vertical. So we are actually inviting all the 20 G20 countries plus the 9 invited to nominate one leading startup from 5 verticals: secure digital infra, agri-tech, health tech, education, and the circular economy, so environment and climate-wise. Each of them will nominate their startups. So 176 startups will come to India, and that will participate in this whole program, whereby we are identifying which solution can go to which country. But ultimately, India has such a heterogeneity in terms of population, in terms of demography, in terms of culture, in terms of language, that anything that we can make work in India can really solve the problem of a lot of countries in Global South and rest of the world. Thank you.
Lavanya, if I can add.
Please.
One big issue for the G20 should be how to create more women entrepreneurs. Today in India, maybe 12% of tech entrepreneurs are women. US must be 18%, 20%. It's very small, because women don't get capital. They don't get capital easily. It's very tough for them, because we started India's first women entrepreneurship fund way back 7-8 years ago called SAHA. It is very tough. So we should create a big fund to fund women entrepreneurs for many reasons. One, women are going to be the majority of human population this year or the next year. India has got 1,020 women for 1,000 men. And 50% of population should take the rightful share to make the world better. It cannot be a men's own world. And we have to foster innovation with women entrepreneurs. And they do a fabulous job. Many women companies have come up and they've done a fantastic job, but they're small, they must get access to capital. So G20, look at a G20 Women Entrepreneurship Fund. To fund women entrepreneurs. And even in India, please announce in the budget a 5,000 crore fund only for women entrepreneurs, because you have not done it. Now, out of 88 or 80,000, how many are women-founded startups? You have to take care of Indian women, Deepak. Focus on Indian women, for the elections are coming next 2 years.
Mohan, let me give you statistics. Indian women startups are growing at 107% in India. Number two, if there is a woman in a senior position in a startup in India, in a management position, 72% of them are getting funded, higher than anyone else. We'll soon lead some reservations for men. Like we have in my organization, I'm desperately trying to keep some reservations for men. We are totally, so it's the other way around, Mohan. Please, we need some protection. But we have a separate vertical in G20, which is on gender, which we are working on.
I think that's wonderful to hear. As a woman myself, and as somebody who's seen a bunch of entrepreneurial activity come from very diverse sources, makes me very happy to know that there will be more and more money available for us, because after all, that is the raw material of our business. I think just parting thoughts from each of you as we think about the priorities that we can focus on. Sean, maybe we'll start with you. There's so much that we could do and discuss, but there are some shared areas maybe of global priority that you might want to just kickstart us touching.
Exactly. So I think when we think about how to focus these initiatives and any resources that may be behind them, we want to be sensitive to what are the unique needs and issues in each country, because they're going to be very, very different. But beyond that, it would make sense, I think, to focus on what are the big shared priorities, sort of global priorities where we really need to address these things together. So they're pretty obvious. Would be energy, clean energy, climate. It could be ag tech. It could be health. I think we talked earlier in the conference, especially yesterday, about some of the geopolitical issues out there. So it may not be a completely open field, because if you get into robotics or AI, maybe you're getting into some, within the G20 membership, some sensitive issues. But I think everybody could probably agree on climate, energy, health tech, and perhaps ed tech. And then, of course, given the digital platform that India has developed and the interest through the G20 in making that available more broadly, I think almost anything to do with digital empowerment is going to be a logical one to focus on.
Mohan, anything from you about even areas like data privacy and some of the things you alluded to?
Those are well debated. I would like to focus on food security.
Interesting.
We can't have anybody go to bed hungry in the world. We have to take a decision, we have to do it. Because we saw in COVID what happened, right?
Yeah.
Countries shut up exports and there was a scare. Second thing, which is a financial inclusion. Why can't every human being have a bank account, be part of the formal financial system? That's how you come up, you get credit. Very important for everybody. Because people need credit for the living. And the third thing is health, like he said. Every human being should have access to health. Nobody should die in childbirth because of lack of medicine. No child should die before the age of 5 because of diarrhea or something. These are solved problems. We got to focus on them to make sure access is there for everybody, so every human being realize the potential he or she has when they're born. And these three are critical, apart from what I said. Data privacy, all that, every bright people will debate this. But as human beings, these three should be the focus. Yes, climate change, energy security, they're all great things. They're all there. But, financial inclusion, health security, food security should be what we should focus on too.
Jeet.
Real quick, so, Mohan, we didn't just give the zero, we also give the yoga and the Ayurveda. And I think we need to really, really focus on, as Mohan was mentioning, about humanism. You know, India being an old, heritage-rich country, have to remember where we stand, what values we espouse, and that's not the only Indian values. That's the universal values, ethics, morality, and sustainable development. Because development for the sake of development is taking away from your children's future, right? And that's what the whole SDG is around. Meeting the needs of today without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So we need to take that triple bottom line approach, evaluate everything, and look at equitability and look at inclusiveness.
Last word, Deepak.
Very well said, Lavanya. And I'll tell you, in my last consultation on G20, which was last month, the member from South Africa, and we were saying, what are the outcomes we should bring? You know, there was this big discussion, I don't want policy, let's do outcomes. He said one very interesting, and it's line exactly what you said. He said, let's come up with an outcome which touches my little girl, which has just been born in, he named some village in South Africa. He said, with this entire disruption happening across the globe, I think people are losing sight of that individual. And the moment he said that, the entire complexion of that table changed. Everything. And all, you know, G20 is going through its own sets of issues. Everybody was on the table immediately. Full set.
I think this true concept of Antyodaya, which the Honorable Minister talked about, which is we have to reach that last person. Absolutely. Absolutely. We're at this unique moment in history where we can do that, and shame on us if we don't make good on, you know, the promise. Do we have time for questions? I know we have been running a little late. Okay, so we wrap here. Okay, great. So thanks so much to each of you. It's been a big honor, and I wish all of us a successful Startup 20 this year.